Good afternoon. I'm here today with Una Shortt. Una is involved in the operationalization of the data strategy between functions, business units, and operations, and manages the company's data for performance office. Welcome, Una.
Hi, David. Thanks for inviting me to speak with you at CDO magazine.
Have you employed certain assessments? And I look at it from the an overall maturity assessment around how you're doing data governance internally and how do you maintain that process going forward, because things continuously change. Can you explain that process for Schneider?
Yeah, I think this is an area which has helped us mature. So we see maturity as critical because maturity reduces risks. Okay, so if you can mature in certain areas and certain aspects that you view that are required in data, you are automatically reducing the risk exposure for the company, because hopefully through that maturity, by reducing exposure, you're also reducing incidents that you may have. So maturity for us is a critical foundation in how we govern entirely in the company, not just in data. And when I think of the maturity of our data strategy over the years, one of the interesting things that we can look at is, it's not just about what we give to Schneider as a company, but as industry experts, we also need to give back to the industry. Like I spoke about, finding those skills. It's also about, what we learn in Schneider, this interview, sharing that knowledge, helping others in the industry. So we don't just do our maturity for ourselves. It's also to help drive the growing maturity in the industry. And in Schneider, really, what we have done is we have built a maturity model, okay, with very clear requirements. There's 32 different aspects to the requirement. And not only then do we have a group chief data office, which you're speaking to the chief data officer today, we actually have 34 business data officers around the company. So we've created a network around the company who are specifically in the business, the operations, or the functions. And they are actually governing the data strategy locally. And how we help them is we assess their maturity as they start out. We look for those key risk areas or those key areas of growth that can have business impact. And that is where they work to mature in the subsequent year. The other thing that we do then as well is, obviously we spoke about the 4 data golden rules and how important they are. We monitor those with KPIs behind those, not just one KPI for every golden rule. Obviously there's a summary KPI about golden rule, but there's multiple KPIs contributing to each golden rule. And we assess those not just for those data offices I mentioned, but also our data domains, which are separate to our data officers. We also have our digital systems, a full, obviously, suite of platforms, whether they're traditional data platforms or transactional systems, and obviously also our strategic programs. We're having a special focus now on understanding the level of maturity of data prior to a strategic program being launched. So multiple aspects, both using a maturity model and then also guiding the organization through maturity by coming to where they are, if it's a strategic program, and helping them see, okay, actually you have these risks, you're not at this level of maturity. Let's help walk you through that.
I see more complexities that come out of this. And it could be because I'm obviously not as technical as you, but when you talk about how you're breaking down and assigning ownership to those domains, how are you going about that at Schneider? Because that seems to be a crucial aspect of giving that ownership over, controlling those domains, and then having specific skilled resources that are in charge of that and have accountability for all of that data. How do you do it there?
It's a brilliant question, David. And, as an engineer, I always first ask, what are we talking about? What is the data domain? Please, my team often get these questions from me. I'm in the organization a long time, but obviously I haven't been at this level of leadership. So certain aspects weren't in my area of ownership. So now I go, okay, what exactly is a data domain and why do we need this? We have data officers, what is this mix? Why is it so important? And when we ask ourselves, really understanding what a data domain is, we need to be super careful that we're not defining those data domains by the organizational structure of a company at any point in time, because organizational structures are management structures. they change. So it's very important that the data domains are actually defined more by grouping data elements. And now we start to get into terminology that most people across the business will go, what are they talking about? Grouping data elements together in logical groupings. That this is where we bring our expertise, right? And we really need to make sure that those logical groupings of data elements are defined and managed. Then, as I say, you have the challenge to make that consumable by the data owners who are across the business who should own this data. So you have to help them recognize that this data belongs to them because this grouping naturally lands to their part of the organization. And one of the greatest, I guess, ways to convince people to own data is to explain the risk of not owning the data and how we all have the accountability really to bring best in class data to the company. So we identify our data domain owners and they own the meaning of the data. So what exactly does the data mean? So when I say a sales order, sales invoice, an opportunity, what does that mean? That might seem basic, but when you start to get down to the attribute level, that can get a bit more complicated. Then they also describe how the data relates to other data. Okay, so for us in the industry, we call it the data model, but they need to describe how in the stream of data, this data flows over to the other data. We have to understand the data regulation, local or global. So we also help them with that. These aren't experts ordinarily in data regulation. So it's our job as a group chief data office to say, actually, if you can explain your data to us, we can tell you where you're at risk and help you protect. There's the massive discussion, we haven't touched off it yet, of data quality. Okay. And data quality is always a thorn in all our sides. As we mentioned briefly, if you start to lose trust in the data, you lose the stakeholder. They may not come back. It's very hard to redeem trust once it's lost. And the data domain owner sets what is the standard for data quality? What do we really need to control? So we need to be careful that we don't try to control everything. Okay, that we pick what's critical to control. Because if you come in with too many rules, people say you're bureaucratic, there's a lot of red tape, and they don't want to do anything. So you have to show that you're agile, that you have data quality rules. It applies to a certain specific set of data that's critical to manage. And then the data domain owner, while they may not operationalize the data, my special word, they are accountable that those who are operationalizing are following the standards. And I would say then really one of the final things that's critical for them is the data access. They need to assure that whoever has access should have access. And surprisingly, that's a very interesting topic. So in some scenarios, accidentally or otherwise, a whole ream of people can get access that maybe shouldn't have access at all. And then that impacts the data creation, because you have people creating data who maybe we haven't trained, we haven't educated on what they need to do. So while it's more complex for us at a group level, we have over 90 subdomains. It simplifies the approach on the ground in the businesses, because you're not asking someone to manage a massive domain, you're asking them to ordinarily manage a sub part of the domain. And then we have a blueprint to help them so they can see what kind of an organizational structure they have. Also, we understand what they have, so we have an expectation of how they can govern. If they've no team to support them, how can we ask them to do certain things? So we really need to prioritize what we do. And then back to maturity assessments, we have a playbook that's both for our data offices and our data domains. And we help evaluate their maturity so they can get the right level of support to really build out that organization that they need. So really interesting, I would say, as I mentioned earlier, one of the great challenges really in any data office, I'm sure, in companies globally.
I can't thank you enough for your insights. I'm sure that everyone that does join in and listen in will be able to identify with what that process is that you folks have gone through at Schneider. And sharing those lessons, I think, is what it's all about in the tech industry. It's, to go through lessons learned and to have someone that's been trailblazing in that space is just, it's priceless to have that shared out. So I'm sure your peers will appreciate the discussion and have a lot of commonalities that they're feeling themselves as they're trying to go through this journey to really impact their business through data. So thank you so much for all of your insights today.
Super. Thank you, Dave. It's a pleasure to be with you today.